Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to begin the workshop series, Ukraine's Recovery and Future. Thank you for joining this workshop in spite of your very busy schedule. Thank you so much for your participation. I will serve as a moderator of this workshop. My name is Toshiya Ueki of Tohoku University. To begin this workshop, I'd like to invite Hideo Ohno, President of Tohoku University, to give us opening remarks. Thank you for the kind introduction. I am Ohno, President of Tohoku University. This is the second workshop on Ukraine's recovery and future. I'd like to say a few words of this workshop to open this event. In June, we had the very first workshop where we discussed the current situation in Ukraine and the support and its latest trends inside and outside our country. At the government level, already international collaboration has been explored. And Japan often referred to Japan sits on reconstruction. We achieved rapid growth since the end of war. We survived 1995 Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and we recovered from 2011 Great East Japan earthquake. We have been able to survive and recover from serious multiple natural disasters. There has been effort made on a national level. And the knowledge and lessons we have been able to gain from the past experiences can be utilized to contribute to the better disaster response and management in the rest of the world. Already, the knowledge we have gained from our experience is already used for exploring approaches to help Ukraine. Already, President Zelensky mentioned that he was hoping to see Ukraine will recover just like Hiroshima did. For example, in order to improve the post-disaster social resilience, we have the concept, build back better. The chairman's declaration of World Ukraine Reconstruction Conference in London this June referred to this concept of build back better. And Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction also adopted this concept, and this resulted in widespread adoption of this concept. But this concept is not new in Japan. In recent years, under COVID-19 pandemic, we referred to a new lifestyle, which we called new normal. And we have utilized digital technologies. As we do so here at this conference, we now have online conference. That is one example of this concept, build back better. In this area of reconstruction, we have been able to contribute to the rest of the world. But it is the universities and academic institutions that have been able to disseminate science-backed information. Tohoku University, as one of the comprehensive research university, have been able to create comprehensive knowledge. With that, we were able to help the communities to recover and reconstruct. In the later lectures, Kuriyama, the head of the IRIDeS, is going to introduce what we have been able to do. Based on what is happening in Ukraine, to provide support, we decided to accept Ukraine students and researchers and their families since May last year. We are providing housings and all the necessities. Even before, immediately before this workshop, I had an opportunity to talk to the Ukraine teachers and students. And they are deeply concerned about the current situation in Ukraine, and at the same time, however, they are hopeful that international community is working on this effort to rebuild Ukraine. University is a new value creator. It is a leader of innovation. University has a mission to support research and education community. For Ukraine recovery, Japan and other countries in international community showed pledge to support. And here at this workshop, 3 universities, Tohoku University, Sophia University, and Keio are joining forces together to explore the way to provide support to Ukraine. This is very useful and meaningful. I'm looking forward to hear very active and meaningful, fruitful discussion here. Lastly, I want to express my appreciation to all the people who have made effort to make this event possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ohno. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Shinichi Kuriyama, the Director of International Research Institute of Disaster Science of Tohoku University. By the way, the simultaneous interpretation is available, and this presentation will be done in Japanese. But as mentioned, from Ukraine, there are some students coming from Ukraine for listening and tuning in to this presentation. And anybody who are listening to this seminar online can have access to interpretation services if need be.
Workshop will be held English and Japanese, so please choose the language. And
in the second workshop at Sophia University, that we had a first workshop, and officials from the government and the businesses and the related agencies came together to talk a lot about this topic. And we will hear the teacher and student from Ukraine, and those Ukrainian perspective will be brought into the discussions, and in that context, how exactly the universities can be contributing to this recovery of the Ukraine from interdisciplinary perspective. We will expect each expert to talk about what will be needed. And obviously, we would like to be willing to listen to what the students from Ukraine, teacher from Ukraine have to say. But first of all, the keynote speech, we'd like to hand the mic over to Mr. Kuriyama. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. My name is Director of International Research Institute of Disaster Science of the University of Tohoku. My name is Kuriyama. Thank you for introduction. First off, let me say that for all of the affected who are suffering from the COVID-19, who are suffering from the Ukraine conflict, we would like to send sincere condolences and sympathy, and we are deeply worried about it. But today, we would like to laser focus on the recovery, and in that context, what exactly the universities can do. That's what we would like to talk about today. But first of all, let me talk a bit about the recovery in Japan. As Ohno said, that we have overcome many things to achieve the recovery. And there are 3 great earthquakes in Japan, actually. The Great Kanto earthquake, that's the first one, as a natural disaster. The next one is the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. And needless to say, there was a Great East Japan earthquake, and even before that, we have Pacific War in 1945, and from which we try to overcome everything. And in that context, obviously, universities have contributed so much. Now, this is the area we would like to shed the light on today. Now, I talked a bit about the Great East Japan earthquake, but before that, let me talk a bit about what we are doing at IRIDeS. When the earthquake occurred, this institute was established. International Research Institute of Disaster Science, and acronym will be IRIDES, IRIDES. That's how we call them. And back in April 2012, this was established. And prior to the great earthquake occurred, that we kind of recognize that every 40, 50 years, off the coast of Miyagi, the earthquake would occur, we know. So we established the research footprint for the disaster prevention science at the University of Tohoku, and we knew that the need to integrate humanities and science and collaborate with the communities. And going back to our research institute, IRIDeS, we uphold the basic principles based on the lessons learned and experiences at this earthquake. Not only Tohoku University, but we try to master all the knowledge and wisdom to contribute to the recovery of this affected area. This is one of the top priorities for us, and we need to be of help for the affected. We have to explore the cooperation with the various institutes, home and abroad, and we have to create and mass the knowledge around disaster prevention and science, and immediately we have to communicate the knowledge and execute disaster prevention locally and globally. And there was an international agenda adopted a few years ago. This is a Sendai Disaster Prevention Framework, 2015 to 2030. And this has to be conducive to reducing the number of disasters we hit across the world. Now, this IRIDeS, engineering, science, humanities, social science, medicine, disaster prevention, whole spectrum of the interdisciplinary perspective have been incorporated. Disaster prevention and recovery. When we think about those, you might think that, engineering, science were all we need. Not that. We need humanities, social science, and medicines are all important, and we have to make it in train. Even prior to the Great East Japan earthquake, we have executed what we think is needed to set up this institute. It's a bit busy here, science, engineering, but the humanities, social science, research, and also the disaster medicine and the disaster prevention, execution, and others here. As I mentioned, this is an international agenda set up. There was a recovery action started after the East Japan earthquake. And back in 2015, this is a milestone year. And at the Sendai, we had the United Nations Disaster Prevention Bosai meeting. And then we adopted the three things, as you see on the screen. This didn't happen all at once, but after 2015, this has been adopted one after another in quick succession. As you might all know well, but this Sendai framework, what is it? Well, on a global basis, this needs to be the worldwide campaign. On a global basis, we have to be all aware of the reducing the risk for disaster. And economic losses and other losses need to be cut. And this is what this framework is talking about. And we have to execute on what we say is needed. And then at Sendai, we had also the World Bosai Forum. We had it 2 times, and the Green Future Creation Institute was set up in May 2023 at New York. Actually, we had a UN high-level meeting, and we heard many times, actually, many officials are saying, what has become of the Sendai framework and what's happened to that? We are seeing a certain progress on that, but deeply concerned. There are many items that actually have been deemed as deeply concerned. So how we are going to turn the table back to the progress we are supposed to make. Not only just controlling disaster, but we have to understand the risk of it and we have to control it. Now we say it's a Sendai framework, and you might wonder what the framework is. Well, this is for humanity, and this has to be the worldwide humanity campaign. This is expected outcome. Obviously, we have to protect life, and we need to substantially reduce the disaster risks and losses. And to that end, what we're going to do? Well, obviously, we set the goal for it, and we need to prevent the new disaster risks and cut conventional disaster risks. Now, here we say hazard. This is an important part. that doesn't contain necessarily the natural disasters. What's been clear-cut here is that hazard has natural disaster and artificial hazard and biological hazard. And these are clearly, blatantly included. And that happens frequently or every other time. And all the things were included as the definition of hazard. So war is obviously artificial hazard. That is clearly included in this hazard set up by the Sendai framework. And first of all, we have to understand the risks and others. There are priorities listed up in the priorities for action. And we all have to unite to build back better. That's what the framework is upholding. Not only individuals, local governments, and the countries around the world, and all the stakeholders have to play their part. And what are the things that they have to do? And that's been all stipulated here. This is, in short, the skeleton of the Sendai framework. There are 50 items, but why not browse them, all of them? If you did, I'll appreciate if you can go into that in details. And we're in the midst of it because we're standing in 2023 and 7 years to go. How exactly can we attain the goal we set ourselves in the first place? Now, in Tohoku University, to begin with, we collaborated with many partners, and international collaboration has expanded to date. Needless to say, that we have IRIDeS inside the University of Tohoku, and we are exploring collaboration on an international way, and we are working together with each university. We have set up the research institutes, and the Pan-Pacific initiatives were underway, and other overseas universities, University of Harvard and the University of Washington, and these also together with the University of Hawaii and Indonesian University too. I mean, we have a very strong relation with the University of Indonesia, and UNDRR, that's one of the institutes that we are collaborating well. And many other institutes and this university work together. Now, in this context, from the East Japan Great Earthquake, how did we overcome? I would like to talk a bit about this. Number one, I hope this will be a little bit learning for you, but what are the nuts and bolts of the creating towns and the communities were everywhere? That needs necessarily just hardware. As we are engaged in dialogue with the residents and local governments, there are culture and history, and within which we have to have a plan for creating communities, and we have to execute them. And obviously there were some conflicts of opinions, but hardware is the indispensable. That's a huge chunk, obviously, and the general comprehensive package is necessary, and we are going back and forth between execution and research. Now, how are we going to realize build back better with the number of population is declining? We have to utilize the local resources and safety, how we build community, and also an urban area, and how we are going to manage. That is important.
Likewise, we are evaluating urban reconstruction utilizing the same method. We go to Yangon to provide similar support in Myanmar, examining what are the risks in urban development. Our experiences and knowledge can be very useful in places like this. And as a matter of fact, reconstruction requires human health, which is a very important factor that is not visible. We have come to realize that at affected area, pregnant women tend to have high smoking ratio, and it stays there, meaning that they will keep repeating starting to smoke. They may stop smoking, but when they are under pressure, they start smoking again, according to the doctors we talked to. So what happens is the lower weight of the babies who are born, and this low birth weight tend to be frequent amongst smoking pregnant women, which is not good for health of children, especially for girls, they tend to have high hypertension when they get pregnant. And the babies that are born from those hypertensive mothers tend to have autism. There's high rate of autism occurrence. This medical survey has been done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and after Hurricane Katrina in United States as well. We did the same survey, and naturally in Ukraine, there will be impact across multiple generations. We talked about the cohort survey in areas that are affected by atomic bomb. The second generation do not have any higher risk of leukemia. And that too needs to be examined in various areas that are affected by disasters. So when there is an impact, we have to notify citizens of the community. As I said earlier, if that is the smoking being the cause, we can encourage people to come to the outpatient services for smokers. So we are communicating with citizens in the community. So such health data and other data coming from the areas that are affected are utilized for building back better. And everything that we gained, the data will be stored in the database. And we also have data that has to do with people. It is important to have large-scale database. Each time we evaluate, and then you have to look back in time and then evaluate again. So that's the second piece, urban planning and human health. When it comes to health, of course, you have to look at the mental health, but further down, you need to really look at the deeper mental state of people. This shows the suicide rate. When a major earthquake took place in 2011, what happened after that? If you take a look at this solid blue line, this shows the area that is severely affected by tsunami, the coastal area. And dotted line, blue line is inland. The blue line indicates male. As you can see, the suicide rate actually goes down for about 1.5 years after the disaster. Then afterward, it started to pick up. In inland, it started to pick up early on. If you look at women, they tend to have hold the wish to kill themselves, but they hardly ever execute on that wish. But when there is they don't even think about killing themselves. But after a year or so, they started to examine exactly where they stand, what is the reality, they think about their family, and this is a very high-risk period. Furthermore, after a year and a half, people who receive mental support from other areas, they will come back to the affected area. And of course, we continue to monitor these people. So as you can see, the line has come close to the national average level. But you have to understand the background, the local culture, and their mental state. So that's something that we learned from this survey. So once again, the understanding local culture is extremely important. Of course, we look at architecture, we look at health, and we look at mental health as well. But one thing that is not well understood is really the preservation of historical documents. In each family, there are a lot of ancient documents stored, and there is very rich culture in there. It contains local history. Spiritual world is right there. So we need to preserve that to understand what has happened in the past, what is the history of that local area, what is the traditional culture, what is the locality. To preserve that, we can provide support. This needs to be part of the local reconstruction, unless otherwise our efforts will fail. You cannot simply impose your own values on them. So as I said earlier, we have researchers of humanity joining our efforts. Now we had COVID-19. This is a recent event. We now have the pandemic response project. Or we try to achieve zero COVID-19. How do people help each other? We need to ask these questions as you carry out this project. All of these questions need to be asked in the affected area. When they look at local reconstruction, they are trying to rebuild the community. That's the most important thing. You can build houses, you can rebuild a town, but people maybe simply stay at home, being isolated. You need to solve this problem as well. So you carry out survey, including psychological survey there. We have a factual analysis, finding out 4 factors that affect people's state. So human relations, the source of their vitality, being able to act as they want, being themselves, and also a pride to live in the community. The people are aware of this, and having this pride of living there is really the source of the wish to protect and rebuild the local community. And this will lead to the concept of build back better. And I think in Ukraine, there must be various cultures, values, different backgrounds within one country. If we are going to provide support, we need to really understand what are the cultural background of people that we are trying to help. I'm pretty sure this is well understood. You cannot simply impose what you think is good for them. So lastly, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. This recognizes the artificial man-made disasters as hazards as well. So our knowledge should be utilized, put to better use based on that. As I mentioned earlier, the local disaster reduction technology and urban planning are also important piece. Professor Nagami of Tohoku University is going to explain in details later on this hardware side. And then to achieve a better health, mental and physical health, we conducted a mid to long-term large-scale survey. And this will be explained by Professor Fujii of Tohoku University. And then in order to realize real reconstruction, we have to understand the local culture and history. So we have to go there first, and we have to be there on a long-term basis. And the German researcher, Julia, has really been at different areas that are affected by disasters. So Tohoku University has been helping people who are affected, helping reconstruction processes inside and outside our country. Having said that, today we're focusing on Ukraine recovery, build back better. We can be some small help to contribute to that reconstruction. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Professor Kuriyama, thank you. As for the questions that you might want to ask or concerned, we are going to have another Q&A session allocated for time. So hold up for the moment. Now, today's workshop for Sophia University, Keio University have collaborated and with us and support us. First of all, we would like to invite Mr. Toshiharu Ikaga, the professor of the Department of Science Engineering of the University of Keio. The floor is yours. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Toshiharu Ikaga, professor of the Department of Science Engineering of the Keio University. And for 16 years, I also have served as the visiting professor at this university too. But we'd like to focus on this theme today. First of all, let's remind all of us of what happened in July, the G7 Kagawa Komatsu Sustainable Urban Development Ministers meeting. And back then, actually, we saw the video message from the Mr. Alexander Kubrakov, Recovery Minister. The key infrastructure repair and the joint effort that G7 all has to make to continue to support the recovery and the revitalization. And that's the message we heard back then. It's not necessarily chronological order, but in April, we also had the G7 ministers meeting on climate, energy, and environment. The decarbonization initiatives were all shared because we all wanted to accelerate. And among all the things that we decided to do, out of them, 82nd item, this is architecture. The carbon emission across the life cycle of the building has to be reduced. That's something we all reaffirmed. What kind of materials, what kind of the specification design that we all use, and how we're going to maintain the circularity to eliminate the emission as much as possible. That's what we all agreed and reaffirmed in G7 meetings. Now, looking at advanced countries, 40% of the carbon emission has something to do with the construction, on top of which road and others, if you think about city, but at least carbon emitted by residents have commanded a lion's share of the urban area. And this figure, it represents Japan's really back, like around 1990. We were in the midst of the bubble, and that was when we tried to build so many buildings in succession. But look at the green. The carbon emitted by new building, which accounted for 12% in 1990. After that, the bubble bursted, and the weight halved, as you see on the far right. But because of the booming of the building, the operational carbon has surged. And then on total, this building-related emission continued to rise to 40%. It continues to rise. That's where we are now in Japan. Now, thinking about it in the Ukraine recovery context, because of the war, the cities suffered, and buildings and infrastructures and buildings all collapsed. And after this, in order to build things, the emission will increase. Now, we stood at 12% in a bubble period, but I think in the Ukraine case, this green area will continue to expand for a while. So the thing here is that how we are going to squash them as much as we can, and in which I think that universities to an extent can contribute. And the red one represents the operational aspects. How we can save energy. For example, the renewable energy can be emitted by this building in some way. And I mean, at the research level, we can contribute in some way. As we did the research, the COP3 was held, which was the Kyoto Protocol. And back then, the Architecture Institute of Japan all discussed about what exactly we had to do. And we tried to predict what would be like in 2050. And I was in charge of this. And what would it take to realize these figures, and industrials and the general publics, and what kind of behavior will we needed? That's what we all formulated back then. Then versus the Paris Agreement target, more rigorous public agreement and target were set after this. By 2050, we have to achieve the carbon neutrality. Look at the zigzag graph. This is a trend of what Japan was like over the past years. In the construction area, you see the red part, this is a retail. And blue one is non-residential buildings emission. And starting in 1990 to 2023 to 2030, meaning 2010, it has grown to 1.6 times or 1.8 times. Now, this was supposed to be the peak, and by 2030, it has to be cut by another 50 or 66%. Otherwise, we can't honor the agreement we made on international fora. In order to achieve these numerical targets, as you see the pictures on the right, even with the big buildings, we have to have innovation so that we can achieve the target. That's the proposals we have made, and we try to go through demonstration and POCs. These are the design the buildings will enable us to hit the targets we set. And as far as residentials are concerned, we could propose some housing that can emit no emission. Especially the construction academics, this is really practical study in a way that they can contribute to the reality. I'll do away with these presentations for several pages. Even before G7 talked about this, but we set up zero carbon building promotion meeting, life cycle carbon net zero promotion meeting. That's the meeting we set up. The Ministry of Transport Land had take center stage in having this meeting together with other businesses, and we tried to formulate the rules for the design. Some point this fiscal year, that rule will be formulated, and that will be applied for any buildings that will be newly built in Japan, so that the carbon emission will be nearing zero. That's the aim that we want to achieve. So in that sense, we could contribute to the support that we can make for that vision. As Kuriyama-san said, the beautiful city landscape of Ukraine was damaged, and also the cultural assets were all collapsed because of this conflict. And how are we going to resuscitate them? In this construction academics and the urban engineering, see them important themes. As one of the items in academics, historical architecture and buildings need to be preserved and resuscitated, and that area can be contributed by the study we are going to do in this major or faculty. Now, this is the SDGs declaration we made from the Architecture Institute of Japan, and I used to be the deputy chairman of this institute. And when we think about the recovery of the Ukraine, we all have to achieve SDGs. That perspective is very essential when we think about the recovery. You might want to recall this again, mainly in the construction area. And we have to play our part in academics. Now, not only decarbonization, I would like to talk a bit about the health, as Mr. Kuriyama mentioned a bit. But 5 years ago, WHO published a guideline for the housing and health. The third, health. 11th, the town making. These are the 2 items of the goals of SDGs, and this guideline should be conducive to realize the 2 items. And after a peer review of the medical thesis, these are the things that we identified, and in other words, these are the targets. As far as the health and housing are concerned, there are various evidences coming out related to smart wellness. The medicine and the construction, and these professors all come together to do the joint research and talk about respiratory diseases and others. From our perspective, that we have to give us deliver support to fight against those diseases. And not only lifestyle diseases, but also life environmental diseases have been all something that we all talked about, and we started to see the evidence backing that diseases. And this requires whole budget, huge budget. And from the construction and city and urban perspective, what's needed is that decent amount of the budget to build the city and building. And with a limited amount of the budget, have to be rightly allocated. And many things were out of the realm of the people who are in charge. For example, insulation is one thing. Can we really warm the room? For a long period of time, we have to think about expense for medical services. What choices will make your life easier? That evidence has started to come out from our research. Now, next topic I'd like to touch a bit is the disaster-related death. In the Great East Japan earthquake, direct related death was announced to be the 15,000 people, but actually the disaster-related death claimed around 24%. The people who claimed their lives were maybe probably driven by disaster, but after actually earthquake occurred, the heat stroke and heart failure occurred and hit them because they have to stay at the really cold places. This 24% is actually just a meager percentage. Actually, the fact is more than that. For example, the 90% or 80%, 60% as you see on the screen in those disasters, in the process of the recovery, what kind of the temporary housing that they are living after the earthquake, that will be very important. And that will be determining factor whether actually they can come back home. They can come back to town. Now, clock ticks the time that I was supposed to finish. Sorry, I spoke a bit long and fast, but the environment is my expertise area. So what exactly can I do to recover Ukraine? That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Professor Ikaga, thank you so much. Let us move on to the next presentation from Sophia University, Professor of Faculty of Human Sciences, Department of Education. We have Professor Taro Komatsu speaking to us. Professor Komatsu is joining us online. So, Professor Komatsu, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. Can you hear my voice? Yes, we can. Thank you. I'm Taro Komatsu from Sophia University. I am in Bosnia-Herzegovina, a neighboring country to Ukraine. About 30 years ago, there was a major intra-ethnic conflict in this country. So I'm participating from my hotel, remotely. I'm hoping that my voice comes through nicely and I'll be able to move slides without any hitch. So what I'd like to talk about today is, first of all, education at the emergency, reconstruction, and development stages. And then I want to talk about the possibility of introducing education. This has been promoted by COVID-19, and I want to talk about 2 examples, children's mental training as well as online collaboration learning. I want to also talk about future possibilities and what a university in Japan can do. First of all, I would like to talk about education support for conflict-affected countries. There are 3 stages. In a short term, make sure that education is continued and ensure safety of children while conflict is still going on or immediately after the end of the conflict. And then you would look at the midterm stage, educational reconstruction. Infrastructure must be repaired, and if sometimes systems are collapsed, you need to rebuild the educational system again. And on a long-term basis, we have to have a perspective of peace building. So conflict-affected countries, and we provide support to these countries, it will be necessary for us to be able to use technologies. So supports that utilize technologies has been promoted by COVID-19 pandemic. In Ukraine as well, online education was introduced during COVID-19. And Ukrainians who left the country continue to receive education services outside the country because of the online training courses. There has been a survey on Ukrainian high school students in Japan, and they were able to continue to receive Ukrainian education in Japan thanks to the online technology. And so during COVID-19, I went to Goldina, Thailand. We were able to carry out online classes, and we analyzed the outcome, and we actually put that into our paper. So using technologies, we can provide support. One example would be the children's mental care support. So let me explain about this mental care training in the conflict countries. Children have trauma. Since the number of children who suffer is so large, and we do not have sufficient number of experts. So schools are asked to provide some support to children who suffer mentally and psychologically. It will be the basic service, but understanding the basics is important. What teachers should do is to identify children who have severe trauma, understand their symptoms, and then try to talk to experts so they will be able to receive expert care. In February and March this year, Japanese government and JICA came to us, and we were exploring how to provide mental care support to Ukrainian children. And we talked to clinical psychologists to create a team to provide the mental care support. So this support is given to Ukrainian teachers at school. In the beginning, JICA was hoping that we can provide some mental care support to children directly, but we can possibly provide mental care support through plays, fun games. You should be able to see how they react looking at their facial expressions. You need to be flexible, sometimes changing the courses of education, but that will be very difficult online. So that is why we decided to provide support to teachers. I am not a clinical psychologist myself, but we created this team. In Bosnia, that I continued my research, and Ukraine, both of them used to be communist countries. They have similar educational systems. So I was able to help in terms of how best we can provide support to schools, working with JICA. We created a homepage like this for Ukrainian children or Ukrainian schools to provide mental care support. We have collected all the educational materials made available to Ukrainian teachers. Secondly, I want to talk about Keio, which is the online collaborative international learning. This April and May, we were working with Ukrainian Catholic University, UCU, to provide online classes. Sophia University is a Catholic university. There is a global conference of all the Catholic universities, and Ukraine Catholic University, located in Lviv in Ukraine. The president of the university talked to us, the vice president of Sophia University. They were discussing how they can join force together. And I come to understand that they are trying to collaborate. So suggested that we should introduce this international learning online. And UCU agreed to introduce this online learning opportunities to students. The theme was the education continued under emergency. We had students in small groups discussing different continuation of education. In this seminar, there are students who are actually affected by major natural disasters. And of course, during COVID-19, sometimes we were not able to continue with ordinary education classes. So we had students from Japan and Ukraine discuss how they can possibly continue education services under emergencies. We had some outcomes. These are the comments made by participating students. One male student from Ukraine said that he had been dreaming to study abroad, but because of the war, they are not able to leave the country. But through this opportunity, he was very happy to be able to be connected with Japanese students. And Sophia University said that everything I knew about Ukraine was through news media in Japan, but it was great to be able to listen to what they have to say directly. But some students from Ukraine said that it was very difficult to understand each other because a lot of Japanese students are very much reserved. They were not able to express their opinions. And I think that could be a common challenge for many Japanese students. On a longer term, peace building perspective is necessary. So this may be farther into the future, but in relation to this peace building, we were actually collaborating with volcanic countries. There are two projects. There is a Mirai project promoted by Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A lot of young people with different ethnic backgrounds were invited to Japan, and as part of this activity, they come to Sophia University, and Sophia University students and those invited students have a small group discussion. And some of these young people from volcanic Balkan countries said that 30 years ago, there were ethnic conflicts, and it's very difficult to befriend it with the people who fought against the same ethnic group. But by having Japanese students in the middle, they were able to communicate better with the ethnic group that the country fought against. This will enable students who are able to actively discuss, even for Japanese students. Another thing that Sophia University has been doing locally is to contribute to peace building, providing a Japanese language education. Where I am, this is a divided country. There is not much communication between different ethnic groups. But Sophia University can provide Japanese language courses. We actually had graduate students who have taken the Japanese language education course at Sophia University, came to this country, try to teach Japanese to young people who are interested in learning Japanese language. And this will result in natural exchanges of views and conversations. So this could be one way to provide support to Ukraine eventually. Lastly, I want to talk about education and peace building, what Japan can do. Japan, in many military conflict, has never been directly involved. So Japan has been regarded as neutral by many countries in this world. So Japan can contribute to have them come to an agreement. And universities do have independent responsibilities based on the freedom of academics and thought. For next generation, we created a seminar class with Ukrainian students, having them discuss with Japanese students, communicate what they experience, communicate what they think. And this has been very useful to Japanese students. They better understand the global trends, global events. In addition to that, they will be able to learn how to promote intercultural communication, and they will become a better global citizen as a result. In that sense, going into the future, joint collaboration that should last a long time is going to be useful to both students and not.
Professor Komatsu, thank you for joining us online from Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'd like to move on to invite the Mr. Kozo Nagami, the special professor of the IRIDeS and the professor at the Green Future Creation Institute of the Tohoku University. Floor is yours. Thank you for your introduction. I belong to Green Future Creation Institute and work at IRIDeS. Thank you for ladies and gentlemen for working together with me and doing the joint research. But prior to that, as a practitioner, I actually worked in JICA for 28 years. So I'd like to share the experiences I have built as a practitioner for past 28 years. And I'd like to think together with you on how to think about the Build Back Better from natural disaster and others to recover Ukraine. Now, first off, on Build Back Better, this is just the reflection. In the standard framework for a disaster risk reduction, this is globally recognized word, and the definition was very clear. Through recovery processes, we all reduce the disaster risk and amplify the resilience of one country or community. When we think about Build Back Better, disaster risk has to be minimized in that sense. And what is disaster risk? Well, that could be multiplied by the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. We all have to understand that there is a linking characteristics on multi-phases. Hazard is exposed to the various areas. Unless that happens, that won't become disasters. But because the hazard is exposed to various areas, that has come to and will come to vulnerability of the community, and that turns to be the risks. And then that becomes disasters. Then this is the multi-directional linking characteristics. Now, first of all, on the left-hand side, hazard. Not only natural events, but because of climate change, driven by artificial development, surely is contributing to that events. But first, that hazard events occur, and this is external elements. And that will become the vulnerability. And we started to see disasters in combination of these two. When we think about, we always have to think that how we are going to nullify the external environment, external elements like left-hand side. But on the right-hand side, vulnerability, the social, economic, and the physical vulnerability are the things we all have to consider. And this is all the consequence of all the development that we have made. So not just disaster prevention effort are necessary, but also do we have to work on the prevention knowledge, and prevention, disaster prevention is what we have to work on. So the challenge is that internal element vulnerability and war disaster and war damage doesn't necessarily occur because of the periodic trend of natural disasters. We have to improve the right-hand side. The same goes for the war damage and natural disasters. Mr. Berkman talks about these disaster risks. Hazard and exposures are a little bit different, whether it's war damage and natural disasters. But see at the S, susceptibility and resilience and adaptation. These are the things we have to improve. Now, it is indispensable to reduce the vulnerability. Then the relation between the conflict and the recovery from natural disasters. DRMFCV nexus, disaster risk management, fragility, conflict, and violence nexus. That's the main discussions we are hearing in the European countries. I mean, community and instability of the towns and communities that in the natural disasters and the war damage might have the compounding risks and bigger damages. This is just one example out of it. And off the coast of the India, in Sumatra, the peninsula, the province of Aceh. Now, what happened because of tsunami in this town? We need to learn from it. And back in 2004, they hit by tsunami, but prior to that, over 3 decades, they were suffering from the internal conflict in the province of Aceh. And this is coastal area picture from the air. This is right before tsunami, and in the Mraksa region, this has been designated as one of the severely damaged areas. And then that has been swept away from tsunami, and actually 70-80% of civilians were killed by tsunami. This is a picture 7 years after the event. They all recovered. I mean, 70-80% of the people were all gone, but actually the victim families and the new residents were started to live here. And community buildings were built by Japan's effort, but because of installing those buildings, we want to protect the certain population in that region. but this region still is vulnerable against tsunami. Physical vulnerability has not been recovered so much, but socioeconomic perspective, it was great because 80% of the people were gone, but over 70% have recovered in terms of the population. And across this Moxa province as a whole, the socioeconomic activities have recovered. Now, what's indicative of it is pretty complex, but why in the first place this has occurred? Is it BBB or is it good thing? We cannot necessarily judge this from the outsider's perspective, but what's behind this tragedy? Well, there are various events. I mean, after the administration changed, these events occurred, and this disaster draws attention. 600 billion yen has been supported, but over half of them are coming from the outside. And decision stake was not really gripped by the people in charge, and actually the people in the country outside are coming rush to this country and try to help support to recover this country. And it's very much possible the same thing has happened in Ukraine. So people and country in question has to take time to think about what exactly that you can do for the future generations, not necessarily achieving things in the short term. There are 6 directions: economic, culture, and governance, and disaster, and other 6 directions are the things we have to consider to reduce the vulnerability. The first of all, recovery on the physical area. And first of all, Kafkaf Dam was collapsed. But fortunately, the Dnieper River and this river area, from the river, there were certain heights. So it seems to be that there was no so much flooding, but in the Crimea, the peninsula, the level of the water has to be maintained, and the corns and the weeds have been grown up. So for the sake of it, we have to recover these areas as soon as possible. And the civil engineering skills, and also we have to have various skills that we have in Japan, and that could be of a help to revitalize this region. And damaged area have to be recovered, and such a comprehensive revitalization plan could be driven and helped by Japan's knowledge. And there is a huge need for the new construction, and we have to have a recycling of the rubbles, and that we have to draw on to a knowledge from the experience we have had in the East Japan Great Earthquake. And we will utilize machines, but the very end of the final phase, we have to classify the garbage at the very end with the humans. So in that sense, that is the helping to revitalize this town and the livelihood of the people. Now, this is economic revitalization. Now, this is not only the Ukraine issues, but this is also food security across the globe. So in that sense, we do have experience in the East Japan Great Earthquake. Even before this earthquake hit, we try to integrate all the areas to bring that to the affiliation group and to have a ground size of the farming. And not only in Higashima city, but other cities have experienced these reforms of the land. Rather than experts going to the region and this area, but the people has to experience things and hands-on. And there are many people actually who experience this in Tohoku. So why not work together with those people and see actually what happens in Tohoku? And this doesn't necessarily contribute to the Tohoku revitalization, but it could be the co-creation of the new knowledge for Ukraine. This is governance aspects. Corruption Perceptions Index has Ukraine on the 116th ranking out of 180. So political fragility and governance aspects, these are also the other elements we have to all correct in a country too. And the vulnerability is one thing that Ukraine is seeing because they were sandwiched between EU and NATO. This is just one example from Nepal earthquake back in 2015. But prior to that, the governance was really fragile in Nepal, actually. Once governance gets fragile, the general public can never trust the central government. So in the process of the recovery, the Japanese government all supported, but the 300,000 Japanese yen has been supporting for this recovery of the buildings. But based on the new seismic standards, that we conducted the testing, and only residences who pass the test can get the money from the government. So in that way, that we are able to claw back the trust and credibility from the general public in Nepal. We have to all consider whether that's possible in Ukraine, but the governance have to be reinforced in the context of the recovery. Now, here's environmental revitalization. The Professor Sato from the Tohoku University is contributing in 2006 in Cambodia and prior to that in different countries. But after this, Croatia, he uses the IRIDeS. This is a landmine sweeper. Fukushima University, and our staffs have worked together to work on challenges in Chernobyl nuclear power station and Fukushima nuclear power station to talk about the carbon neutrality and also the recovery from the disasters. And they're all doing the research for this. This is the one example from the Professor Sato, and the CMSC, that's one center that it has in Cambodia, and we are inviting the SESU, the unit member, to Cambodia, and over 50 units of ALIS will be provided to Ukraine, and we would like to expand the technological support for that country as we go forward. This is just one example from Chernobyl, that this has to be leading to the next generational experiences after what we have experienced in Chernobyl nuclear power station. As Mr. Komatsu repeated and highlighted the importance of it, but education is important for mid to long-term recovery, and inclusive and social capital emergence is all important. Cultural aspect is important. This happens in Ishinomaki City, especially Kitano Kami town events. The traditional building, traditional culture is all important to recover that town. To recap, there are 6 vulnerability elements. We have to stamp out these fragility one by one. That's important, but they do have a causation and a correlation in between. You can't just take a look at what's happened just before you and try to address the vulnerability. That doesn't necessarily resolve everything. We have to revisit what we are doing. You have to all visit the root causes of the vulnerability, maybe the governance, maybe the social vulnerability. In the first place, we all have to wrinkle out of these mechanisms in between the 6 fragility. We can't realize the short perspective of the recovery, but the 100 years from now in Ukraine, what has to remain, that's the one important perspective we can't forget. Thank you. I would like to invite Ms. Yulia Gerster, who are serving as assistant professor in the Disaster Cultural Archive Research Area of the IRIDeS of Tohoku University. Ms. Yulia is reporting online. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't really feel great, so please excuse me in joining you online. I'd like to talk about the recovery of Ukraine. But actually, I have a fever, and if my Japanese gets a little strange, and please excuse me. And I'm not an expert in Ukraine, but I did a research in Japan, and from which we would like to get a hints and clues to think about the recovery in Ukraine. First, on the Great East Japan earthquake, and many other professors talked about it, so I'll talk a bit about that in the presentation. But here, what's important is that after the major disasters, there is the phenomena called the disaster utopia. According to a certain professor, after a major disaster, in a very short period of time, the human beings try to support each other and help them out each other for a short space of time. But according to the various people, professors, well, violence is something that has been raised in TV program, but not only disaster, but actually disaster utopia occurs. In Japan, that happens. Try to help out each other and, to cheer up on each other. There is a concept called kizuna, or bond. Then what's important is that as time goes by, in the process of disaster utopia, there is a gap of the effectiveness. Actually, one of the researches I did has been actually impacted by the precedent research done in Ukraine. Apology, Miss Yulia, could you please share the screen? Oh, didn't I? Yes, please. Could you please share the screen first? Oh, apology, because I thought I did. Do you see the screen? Yeah, we do. Okay, could you please enlarge it? Yep, thank you. Great, thank you. Go on. Okay. Okay, it was great because I'm just off to start. There was precedent research done in Ukraine. One of the famous case is the event after Chernobyl, the nuclear power station, and the biological citizenship in Ukraine. Because of this damage done by the disaster, that there were some positions in community and stance, but that the relations between the affected became stronger. And that becomes the levels of the victimhood. And the pension sometimes rises because you were affected by the disaster. And sometimes you're physically damaged by that disaster. And the more you understand, the more likely that you get the support. Now, when we think about differences in effectiveness, there were some other researches about the war in Ukraine. Some people were evacuated to Poland. And there is one research about them that host families and the affected, in other words, evacuees. In between them, there were social relations, and there is one research about that social relations. But actually, there were two professors from Poland universities say that even in between the evacuees, there were some differences, like from where they were coming from and when exactly they evacuated. And then the gap started to grow. For example, in Kyiv, war intensified, but prior to that, some people evacuated to Poland, but their experiences were different from the ones that were coming from the other places. So the stance and positions of even among the affected all gets different. That's something we started to uncover. Now, in the case of the Great East Japan earthquake, I call it the hierarchies of the affectedness. That gets different between people to people. You have your own experiences of the damage, and when you compare the one with the others, the way you feel gets sometimes different, because the way you see the loss yourself gets different if you compare with the others. So there are different kinds of the losses and the gap. For example, when we think about loss, Great East Japan earthquake is the natural disaster, and there are a variety of losses. For example, you have a loss of the families, or even within which you lost your parents, or you might have lost your children, or all family members. Once you visit the affected areas, no one lost nobody. Like the people who lost neighbors, or your houses were lost because of the tremors or tsunami, but whether it's a tsunami or tremors, that's all different. Sometimes you couldn't find the remains of your loved ones, and there were invisible damage from the radiation. So you might think that the others have much more disaster or tragedy, so I shouldn't speak up how hard it is, how hard it could be. Some people think that way. And in the Great East Japan earthquake, the way the recovery should be, that has led to the gap of the people looking outside. For example, in Fukushima, there were zonings, and according to the level of the contamination, radioactive contamination, some people couldn't go back to where they used to live, and that started to come to the gap. And the same goes for tsunami hit area. If you used to have houses in tsunami hit areas, you can go back and revitalize your houses yet again. So that has generated the gap of the affectedness, a gap of the losses. Now, what counts here is that, yes, zoning occurs. Zoning doesn't necessarily represent the level of the affectedness. If maybe you used to live in the areas not returnable, and some people couldn't go back, and if you're living in areas who are welcoming the residents back, sometimes you might want to keep your residential status in that area. So depending upon who you are and where you used to live, that things started to get different. So what will be implications you might get because of these events? Cultural and anthropology is one expertise I have. And this is just the comments I hear individually in that research. This is one comment I hear, and that this person is from Namie, Fukushima Prefecture. And for the sake of the residents in Namie town, there are very supportive events in Tokyo, but actually, because of radioactive damage, she couldn't go back to their hometowns. But the most damage hit her is that the losses of the houses that she lived in because of tsunami. So she said that it's uncomfortable to talk with anybody else because she has different kinds of the tragedy, even though there are some radioactive damages for somebody else, but still they have houses, and she didn't. And even among the affected, you started to notice the silence. For example, this is one case of the student from Soma High School. This is one comment from the student in the school. And he said that he tried to look at the other pupils and what kind of experiences that they did, and he had no idea. But it was not until that he realized that what kind of experiences the friends did. I mean, it tends to be taboo, and he was not really comfortable in talking about it for some point. And another thing to note is that how you think about your social positioning against the others, that has been also impacted by these disasters. And this is one person who commented, who worked in Kamaishi and for our nursing facility, and he didn't lose any houses. And she all along wondered whether it's necessary for her, or it's possible for her to work in this kind of supporting initiatives. But she did feel that she has to be supportive of the affected. So she thought at one place that, well, others had harder experiences than that I did. And so she sometimes found it very difficult to find any topics to talk with. So how you see yourself in the gap of the affectedness, and whether or not you have access to the aids for resources, I mean, that gets different, because you might sometimes think that, oh, others have a hard experiences, so I do have access to the resources, but still I don't think I should. Or maybe you think that, oh, you shouldn't deter anybody else to rushing to the aids and resources because of the perceived differences of the gap of the affectedness. Now, there are a variety of the affected experiences. Then this is one school that accommodates so many kinds of the students who experience various tragedies. And in order for everybody to talk about and speak up of the experiences that they had, these events were held. These are just one examples. And in the affected schools, and not only schools actually, but in the theater projects were run, and through arts, the people can speak up their experiences in some form. But not only that, you might want to identify with the main character in one theater. You narrate your own experiences, but the others will play that role so that you can represent what experiences that you went through. And sometimes students interview with the affected, and based on which the theater and plays sometimes can be made, and so that the students can take ownership of that tragedy, not necessarily see it as the others' experience. I've also gone through various interviews, but one thing I covered is that through plays, it was not until then you played this play and know what experiences the others felt. Some students said so. So the power of art is very strong in this context, I thought. Now, to recap, when we think about the losses, gap, and affectedness, that varies according to people. How you recognize the damage, the things get different, and according to which access to resources and access to aids get different. What kind of social positioning I have, that could be the important factors too. And you might sometimes wonder, oh, what kind of topic I should have conversations with somebody else in that process. And I think in Ukraine, as time lapses, there could be some gaps that could be yearning, depending upon what kind of experiences that they go through. Through art projects, through arts, you get to know the others' experiences, and they will be the great opportunity for yourself to think about your own experiences. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerster. Professor Gerster, thank you very much. Thank you for joining in spite of the fact that you're not feeling well. Now, in the second workshop, well, we actually had the first workshop in June, hosted by Sophia University. In the very first workshop, every speaker was a Japanese. And we had Japanese government, funding agencies, enterprises, universities. They represented different perspectives. But in the second workshop today, we have a new perspective. The person who is directly affected by conflicts, for example, in Ukraine, we have a person who is affected by this war and what they want. We now have the representative voice. And this is a very important perspective for us to decide what we can do to help Ukraine in the future. So the sixth and last presentation today is by a student from Ukraine at Tohoku University. She is part of an international program in liberal arts, IPLA. She's from Odessa State Academy of Civil Engineering and Architecture. We have Margaryta Goldina speaking to us. From Ukraine, we have two other students. Aerospace professor, associate professor of aerospace from Ukraine. Dmytro Fedorynenko, Professor Dmytro Fedorynenko. Thank you for being here with us. And the cultural research, Japanese cultural research, Ms. Maria Kravets. So there are three Ukrainians at this venue. So representing them, I'd like to invite Ms. Margaryta Goldina to make a presentation, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Margaryta. I'm Ukrainian. I was born and raised in Ukraine, and it's an honor for me to be presenting today. In my today's presentation, I would like to first introduce my background and my hometown. Then I will move on to the brief summary of the current situation in Ukraine. Then I will introduce some of the memories I had about moving to Japan and the experience of being a student in Tohoku University. And then I will talk about some of the concerns we have about reconstruction of Ukraine. So, when talking about my background, I was born and raised in the city of Odessa in the south of Ukraine. The most remarkable part about Odessa is that it is on the shore of the Black Sea. Odessa is often called the Pearl of the Black Sea, and it makes Odessa not only the center of tourism for people from Ukraine, but also for our neighboring countries. The city center of Odessa was built in the 18th and 19th century. The many buildings there are the part of UNESCO heritage. We also have, you see over here, it's our opera theater, which is considered the second most beautiful in the world. And this is my family. My entire family is still staying in Ukraine. We've been living in Odessa for more than a century now. And a lot of older people in Ukraine, since their entire lives have been spent there, they just cannot leave. They just don't see their lives outside their homes. Now, let's move on to the current situation. Some of the main issues we've been facing now has been, first of all, the power outages. Around the spring of this year, the critical infrastructure has been hit very hard, and some of the critical parts of the infrastructure have been completely destroyed. For example, the water pumps have been affected, and the satellites. So basically, we didn't have water for weeks at times, and you couldn't even call anyone because there was no service. Second issue that has been mentioned before is the flooding and the disaster that was caused by it after the dam destruction. Many people's houses have been completely flooded, and again, since a lot of older people refused to leave their houses, they have sadly passed away in this disaster. What we've been seeing in Odessa is that a lot of big pieces of houses have been washed ashore, a lot of corpses of animals and people, which now resulted in ecological catastrophe, since now we cannot fish in the rivers anymore, since it's way too dangerous. Swimming in the sea is also dangerous for people's health, which resulted in shortage of food in some places of, in the south. And of course, people live on the constant fear of missile strikes in all parts of Ukraine. For example, for the past 3 weeks, I've been visiting my hometown, Odessa, and the first day that I arrived, there've been a huge missile strike, specifically on Odessa. Many houses in the city center and close to the port have been completely destroyed, and a huge supermarket was also struck. It caught fire and completely burned down. The devastation of the people and the drastic measures they had to take were honestly heartbreaking. For example, over here you can see a picture. This is a mother writing the name of her child on her back, and the contact information of the mother and the father. So in case the parents die, the child at least will know their name and when they were born. And next to it, you see a picture of a young man who was a volunteer. He was volunteering, helping to clean up the destruction in the occupied areas. Odessa, since the beginning of the war, the escalation has changed a lot. For example, this is the main street where of my hometown. We see barricades, anti-tanks, hedgehogs everywhere. Some parts of the city have been completely blocked to prevent terrorist attacks. Many buildings have been destroyed. People have lost their homes. We're also taking a lot of refugees from the southern areas. Even people who are also, all the people who have been injured are first transported to Odessa, but even there they cannot be safe. For example, over here you see a little girl in Odessa Central Hospital, and even though that her life is already in so much danger, we had to barricade the windows in case there is a missile strike and the windows might get blown out. And a little bit about how my daily life changed. This is a picture that has been taken by my mom. So as you may know, every time there's a missile strike, we need to go to the shelters. But for many people, and for us as well, the closest shelter is very far away. You need to walk for at least 20 minutes, considering that you have children or older people, or like we have a dog, for example, it takes way more time. So sometimes if you have like 6 missile strikes in one evening, you just don't have time to do anything. And for a university student like me, if I just go every time, I will not have time to do my homework, to prepare for my classes, and you just lose all parts of your normal life completely. So what we would do is we would go to the corridor area of our home. We would take yoga mats and just sleep there. About moving to Japan. I came to Japan in September last year. I was part of the IPLA, International Program in Liberal Arts. I made so many amazing friends here, and the people here have been so warm and so welcoming. I've also been able to experience not just traditional Japanese culture, but also local Sendai culture. For example, these are pictures from the Sendai festival. We were part of the Susumu Odori dance team. Before that, I've never danced before at all, and I was very surprised to discover this little talent that I had. We also learned about Japanese history and Japanese culture, such as Japanese tea ceremonies, traditional clothes, and for many of students, including me, it made us reevaluate who we are and who we want to be. Some of the reconstruction, even though the war is far from being over, there are some things that are very concerning right now. As an example, damage evaluation. Whenever there's a big missile strike, even if it's far away, like kilometers away from your home, you can feel the walls shaking. The windows are shaking. The buildings, even though it's modern buildings, are shaking as if the missile strike was right next door. So what a lot of people are concerned with is that we know that the damage has been done, but we don't know the extent of the damage, since we don't have any earthquakes or any natural disasters of this extent. Also, after living in Japan for about a year, I definitely took notice of how well organized Japanese people are. And I think when it comes to reconstruction efforts, to be more efficient, we should definitely learn from how Japanese people organize their work and their organization structures. One thing that has been mentioned before is the preservation and reconstruction of monuments and art pieces. Many buildings that hold historical value have been destroyed either by missile strikes or by floodings. And again, since Ukraine doesn't experience many natural disasters, we don't have as much expertise as we might need, and also as many specialists. So I think since Japan has so much experience in this field, we could definitely use some of that knowledge in the future. And to sum it up, I want to thank not just Japan and Japanese people, but also Tohoku University for continued support of Ukrainian people, both in Japan and in Ukraine. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ms. Margaryta, thank you very much for your presentation. You talked a lot, but she wears traditional clothing and showing the pride that she has in a culture that she has enjoyed. Thank you very much. At Tohoku University, she studies in construction studies. perhaps she will be contributing to the recovery of Ukraine after she studied in Japan. Thank you. Now, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are very punctual in today's events. In the second workshop today, there were no other sessions, so we have heard from the government officials talking in that session, but the achievements and all the researches we have gone through, those are something we have presented throughout an hour. But here, at the same time, we would like to hear the comments from the government officials because I think it's important. Today, we have invited the Policy Director of International Cooperation Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sugahara, who are joining us online. He is extremely busy, but because of this part of the session, he's joining us. Mr. Sugahara, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sugahara from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'd like to talk about the ministry that is in charge of Japan's diplomacy. 1.5 years ago, Russia invaded Ukraine. And this has been a shock to international community. It's just unilateral military actions which cannot be tolerated because it shakes the foundation of order. So we need to deal with this with solid attitude. As Margaryta said, this was quite heartbreaking, but invasion still continues on. The Japanese government, in relation to Russia, decided to impose sanctions on Russia, try to freeze properties of individuals and enterprises from Russia. In 2023, for Japan, we served as the presidency of G7 summit. We took the leadership of this international conference. So we are collaborating with other countries to join in the sanction against Russia.
In March, actually, Prime Minister Kishida visited Ukraine. And in June, in G7, Hiroshima summit took place. And that was where the President Zelensky directly attended. Maybe that was a fresh in your memory, I think. Now, these diplomatic policies have been laid out for the sake of the Ukraine and Ukrainians, and government of Japan continue to support the standing by those publics. Now, symposium theme, that is something we overcome after the rubble of the disasters. We have amassed various experiences, especially in Tohoku region. We suffer from the Great Eastern earthquake and a number of natural disasters. And utilizing those knowledges, we need to contribute to the Ukraine. This theme has so much potential. Mr. Kuriyama made a keynote speech, and the knowledge and experience of Tohoku University are important, and also the Keio University and Sophia University, and you are working together to contribute to the recovery of Ukraine. I like to take off my hats. Now, as far as the supports by the government is concerned, now in this context, back in June, the first time in 8 years, the policy development, the guideline was revised. Now we are in the reflection point of the history, like a Ukraine conflict and energy and humanitarian crisis and food security, climate change, infectious diseases. These are global affairs have compounded. Now these global affairs, how we are going to address those affairs, that's been really testing us. I recognize. And in support for the recovery of Ukraine, not only government, but civil societies, communities, local governments, universities, research institutes, and ourselves have to all work together to support the country. So far, we have supported the Ukraine, such as right after the Ukraine aggression, the neighboring countries too. $7.6 billion have been supported. What's in it is that international cooperation like a JICA or other international research, international institutes, the recovery, security in food, and also the food. Food is one thing, but also accepting evacuees, that's one support that we have offered. In today's presentation, somebody said that there are some support that can be driven by Tohoku, and Mr. Nagano said that the unexploded landmines in Cambodia, we have long years cooperated to sweep the landmines, and that's experience we are able to support. And IRIDES, that is a detector that was used and has been used in Ukraine. And this is the metal detector and the underground radar to visualize what's inside, what's buried in the land. This is the very first technologies that we invented, and especially from Tohoku region, this draws attention. And third countries cooperation, and I said Cambodia, not only just delivering IRIDES detector to Ukraine, but SESU members will come to Japan and Cambodia and Poland to get to know that what needs to be learned. So Cambodia, Poland, and Japan have worked together. This is one thing that is indicative of the support. And the financial support is important, but technological support is another. So we have to sweep the unexploded landmines. It shouldn't be one-off. We should take some time sustainably to work on this issue. Other than that issue, rubbles need to be removed. In Tohoku region that we had, this is a seminar that we heard how we are doing. In this East Japan earthquake, 97% of the rubbles were recycled, and that know-how can be used. At the end of June, there was an online seminar like dozens times. And Japan has delivered the construction machines, and that was involved in the pilot project to remove the rubbles. In agricultural sector, JICA executed agricultural trainings, and Ukrainian Agricultural Food Ministry and its officials have joined that training. And smart agriculture and irrigation skills were utilized there. And Miyagi Prefecture was where he visited to learn the lessons from the Great East Japan earthquake. Even before the Russian aggression, Ukraine was one of the best the grain exporting country that holds the key for the food security. And in that area, I think that we are able to support and contribute. Now, the very indicative, the Tohoku signage Tohoku project could be something that we can talk about, but ODA, Official Development Assistance, is the one thing we're still running. But one area we have focused, there are 4 pillars. One, as I explained, the mine sweeping and the rubbles removal. Second, the reconstruction of the livelihood, water, hygiene, and the health education. They are seriously in short of the electricity and heat water. So we have to satisfy the demand and needs of the heater. In terms of the education, Mr. Komatsu and Mr. Fujii talked about that topic today. The mental health care for children is crucial. And having a seminar and sharing knowledge based on the Tohoku earthquake, that's something that we continue. And also the industrial revitalization, agricultural revitalization are all important. But startups and its supporting supporting for startups are the one area we would like to focus to. Now, the governance reinforcement and democracy, that's a fourth pillar. The right information need to be gone through, and that is really important infrastructures among the general public. The fair, impartial communications is necessary, and to which we have to give out support. So these four pillars that we had in ODA, and other than ODA, the government has the equipments like bulletproof vest and the preserved foods, and those supports we have offered to Ukraine too. And when we think about support for Ukraine, in order to do this in a full-fledged manner, there were various challenges. But still, the Ukraine is under war. So in terms of safety, sometimes that has come with a difficulty in going there actually and doing some activities. But as you see various examples, among which G7, international community, and Japan work together to do everything we can. And there are many things still we can do. That the importance of the mental health care and disaster medicine, disaster science are all important. And there are many things we can do actually online. University cutting-edge research and Japan's signage technologies and its support are still possible to be delivered to Ukraine. And that possibility really is illuminant in this seminar. Still, it's hot in summer in Japan, but we are seeing really cold winter. We need to have a recovery in Ukraine, but we have to go pass through the winter. That's one challenge in Ukraine, I think. And after winter, it will mark 2 years since the conflict aggression starts. Now, the year end and the beginning of the year are important. The Ukraine Recovery Promotion meeting will take place in Japan around that time. And obviously the things were hangs in the balance, but the solidarity with the Ukrainians is something we have to embrace together, addressing the food security. And we have to achieve the recovery, revitalization. We have to all think about all the steps we have to take to support for Ukraine and neighboring countries. Once again, going back to where I started, we are seeing the inflection point of history currently on the international affairs. This Ukraine today could be our Asia's tomorrow. So that's the stance we have in dealing with the diplomatic issues. As the Ukrainian people are under war, we have to support them. In supporting them, the new development guideline was revised again. But local governments, civil societies, and other NGOs and other research institutes and universities and Japanese government would like to work together. These 3 universities workshops have a really fruitful opinions exchange, and we hope that this will be the global support from the government of Japan. Thank you. Mr. Sugahara, thank you very much.
So we have heard what universities are doing, what they have learned, and in order to connect this to actual support in Ukraine, we need cooperation from the government officials. So in that sense, universities and the government need to work together. So thank you very much once again. So let us move on to the panel discussion and Q&A session. The speakers at this venue, we will rearrange the stage for the panel discussion. So give us a few minutes. Thank you for waiting. We would like to begin Q&A session. There was a few times mentioning the university knowledge being applied to international cooperation. We have a good example by the development of Professor Emeritus Motoyuki Sato, IRIDeS example. Mr. Sugahara from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also mentioned about this. This is utilized in Cambodia, and this can also be utilized for Ukraine, because 30% of the Ukrainian land is contaminated with landmines. So as part of reconstruction efforts, I believe this deep mining is an indispensable part. So this is just one example that I want to introduce. If you could move on to the next page, please. So we invited people from emergency agency of Ukraine. They actually came to Cambodia and Poland. This photo is from Cambodia. They received training to use this landmine sweeper equipment. And we're hoping that this development is going to be useful for Ukraine recovery. And there are many other approaches to help. So if you have questions first at this venue, I'd like to take some questions here. Does anybody have questions? If I may break the ice, I'd like to ask Margaryta.
Margaryta returned to the Odessa for 3 weeks, and she returned to Sendai yesterday. She had a plan to return to Sendai the day before yesterday, but the airplane was delayed. So I'm very concerned about her delay to return to Sendai. But fortunately, she could return to Sendai and to study in Tohoku University again. And if you have any comment on the presentation by the today's professors, we are very honored to hear.
Oh,
Please.
Thank you so much. First of all, I was very impressed by the deep understanding of many issues, such as the flooding that we had experienced after the dam, and that it has been mentioned, and the concerns about the upcoming winter, which is the concern for many Ukrainian people right now. Yeah, and the issue that we have with the mines, since we are the most mined country in the world right now. So I'm really grateful that people are paying so much attention and researching the situation and the ways to improve it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Margaryta. And it's a panel discussion. So
So I'd like to start with Professor Kuriyama, listening to other presentations and what Margaryta said and Professor Hideo said. If you have anything to say, please, your comments is welcome. Thank you very much. So my wish is to achieve reconstruction that is most appreciated by Ukrainian people. This requires wide range of cooperation. Everybody needs to join force. So this was a reminder. It's not just academia. It's not just these 3 universities, other Japanese universities and universities across the world. We all want to do something about the situation. So you could tell us what you want. You talk about the reconstruction of historic sites. Of course, we are going to extend the help there. And Ukrainians are not alone. We are with them. So we just want to confirm that. And we would like to extend our help based upon our comprehensive knowledge that we have in our university. Thank you very much. So I'd like to move on to the next speaker, Professor Ikaga. If you have any comments, please. Early on, Mr. Sugahara from Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that there is this upcoming winter awaiting in Ukraine. They are up north, higher there than Hokkaido Island in Japan. meaning the winter is going to be even colder. And think about the living conditions in winter in Ukraine. So as we provide support for their reconstruction, we have to make sure the housings need to be equipped with needed performance. How can we ensure the budget that is necessary to do this? So we have to start with the health status of people living there. Tohoku University has done long-standing medical survey, so that is important. So in the very beginning, you have to think about this for reconstruction, because the decision we make up front may affect the health state of Ukrainian people for a long time. So it really tells me exactly what I have to do in my research area right now. Thank you, Professor Ikaga. So we do have Professor Nagami from online, who's
I have a question for Nagami Sensei. Thank you for sharing your broad expertise today. My question is, what meaningful solutions can be prioritized in cases of disaster recovery ということで。
So how can we prioritize meaningful solutions to cope with disaster reconstruction? So I'd like to invite Professor Nagami to answer this question.
Well, actually, that is a very good question. In my presentation, I explained that a bit. But after all, there are various kinds of fragility. And Ukrainian society fundamentally has those fragility even before aggression. And we have to look back, and we have to be reserved, and we have to have a reflection. Now, from a university's perspective, I would say it's a general knowledge, but the various stakeholders in Ukraine play its part in their own sector or industry, whether it's a medicine or medical services, agriculture, or maybe governance. Those professionals have created the Ukrainian society, and in which what kind of fragility we might have currently in Ukraine. We have to be standing still here and look back. And then what went wrong? Or what are the areas we could improve now, even now? That's something we have to look back and think through. That is important. Between factors, there are some causation, correlation. So we have to have a calm head to think about it. It takes time, though. Okay, Nagami Sensei, thank you. Fujii Sensei, Professor Fujii, any additional comments or any takeaway? Well, thank you. There is one thing, only one thing I want to say here. I took a shot and did the presentation. I mean, the way the recovery should be, I mean, it's not that we all engage in that work on a day-to-day operation, but there are some people who are doing the work, and that it's important to create such a huge systems in Ukraine. And we all talked about construction, education, and we all talked about that. And there are various ways of doing it. And then we might have to see the fragmentation of the knowledges if the expertise get deeper. So it's important to share the knowledge and experiences each other, and they have to update our knowledges so that we can identify what will be the best to recover from disaster or the events happening in Ukraine. In other words, we have to have a common ground with the data. So data-driven initiative has to advance. Okay, thank you. Okay, any questions from the floor? Actually, as we have the second workshop in Tohoku University, and Sophia University and Keio University, and gave us support so much. In this second workshop, we wanted to value the people who actually experiencing this, and that perspective was very important, and that's actually behind this event. And next workshop, as you see on the flyer, 2023 December, this December, at Keio University, we host this third workshop. The third workshop will talk about the new knowledge and experiences and the themes based on the two workshops we have had. And at the very final workshop, we would like to recap and what are the things that we got from these three workshops. But today, we have the dean of the Keio University, Mr. Toshiya. I know it's out of the blue, but sorry to make a cold call. But Toshiya-san, how do you look back on the two workshops? And is there anything that you can share with us on a third workshop from you? I appreciate that. Well, Professor Ueki, thank you. My name is Toshiya from Keio University. As I heard you talking today, recovery, reconstruction has many aspects to it. It's from the recovery of the national system and rebuilding the town as a whole and rebuilding architecture from scratch. And we have to have a more vibrant community for the general public. And whether it's a physical and mental aspects, we have to support them. So from variety of aspects are all included in the recovery. I thought, yes, I think I knew it. But once again, I heard you presenting. I was really impressed and startled by how much work that is awaiting us. It might take another decades in initiatives, I thought. I mean, all want to explore the solutions, the best solutions, but what kind of initiatives will be needed to overcome these difficulties? I want to hear the solutions. Maybe those solutions might be coming out from the government of Ukraine, but President Zelensky, even President Zelensky alone is not enough. The foreign governments and foreign researchers and the others' involvement will be necessary. Even though we make a fuss about it, that doesn't make sense. It's important that Ukrainians feel they're trying to help us. It will be at best, but at worst, it will create confusion because of this support we rush to give. There were 4 recoveries that we experienced in Japan, as somebody said, but how was that possible that we overcame those? And that knowledge need to be shared further. And Professor Ueki alluded the third workshop, that from international community's perspective. How should we think about the Ukraine? That kind of theme, the grand theme that we would like to address, the Ukrainian ambassador to Japan and the Poland ambassador to Japan and the Republic of Lithuania ambassador to Japan would talk and make a speech. And brilliant triangle, that's something we say it. These 3 countries have some framework to support Ukraine. And then in which how Japan will be involved. These are the themes we will like to feature in the third workshop. Okay, thank you. We also have the Professor Morishita, the Deputy Dean from Sophia University, who hosted the first workshop. Any comments would you like to make? Well, thank you so much for your precious stories and presentation. Back in the first workshop, as Ueki-san said, the government and various stakeholders introduced the initiatives that they undertook. But we went further today. What are the specific challenges we all facing, and what could be the potential solutions? That's what we have talked about. And Ueki, he talked about that it shouldn't be, that support shouldn't be the bringing about any confusions at all in Ukraine, although we all are compassionate about the recovery of the Ukraine, that each and every people and the town and city in Ukraine, I mean, across the board, we have to have a very good level of the support for town level and government level. I mean, we have to have a long-term standpoint. It's very difficult to go into Ukraine, actually, but by having the Ukrainian-related seminar, that we are able to give out the quality supports for Ukraine once the country gets us inside. So we hope this seminar will lead to the next step. Professor Morishita, thank you. There were several questions raised online, but actually we are running behind time. So this workshop, the second workshop to think about the recovery for Ukraine, this will be closed now. Thank you very much for very precious comments and presentation. Professors, thank you. And also we have a raw voice from Ms. Margaryta, and everybody for joining us online. Thank you so much for your attendance on behalf. Thank you so much for your attendance, ladies and gentlemen.